Hello, and welcome to Beering in Mind Beer Reviews. Today we are going to continue with our series of Baird beers, and we're going to look at a very limited special beer, and it is this one, which has nothing on the label here, but explains on the back that it is Baird Nihon Koji Sour, and this is batch number 4 of this. And this is a beer that was designed for the opening of Baird's Kansai tap room, which is called Base Station Kansai, and they call it Base Station Kansai Celebration Ale. So they've made this again 3 times before, and this is the 4th time they've made that beer. So we'll talk about this beer briefly, and then I'm going to add on a little extra today and talk about a book I read some time ago, which seems, with each month of the current political situation, it seems more and more timely. It's called The Fifth Risk by Michael Lewis. But back to the beer. This beer came out quite recently. Here it is classified as a sour wild beer, flavored, and it's a 6% beer, 6% alcohol with 25 international bittering units. On RateBeer, this beer has only 1 rating. The average is, the score is 3.3 out of 5. Again, released in January of 2020, so it hasn't been around very often. Kind of hard to find these special limited ones. I found this one at the department store in Kyoto. It's part of Baird's Fruitful Life series, their fruit beer series. And in this beer, it contains mikan, which is a kind of mandarin orange or tangerine. And they use the juice from that and also zest from the peel. And it also has white koji, which is a type of fungus that's used in making shochu. Generally, there are 2 types, black and white, and the white kind is very commonly used to make the Japanese liquor called shochu. And they put it in 2 editions, so it's kind of double, not double hopped, but double treated with the juice and the zest. Okay, well, Baird Beer they've been around for a long time. They started in 2000 and opened up their tap room in Numazu, Shizuoka, a small fishing port in Shizuoka Prefecture on the Pacific Ocean. And in 2008, they started expanding their exports to the USA. In 2008, they also opened a tap room in Tokyo, their first one in Tokyo. And they began expanding. They opened a brand new brewery in 2014, also in Shizuoka. And they have 10 different tap rooms throughout Japan, and also one in Los Angeles. So they've been quite aggressive in expanding throughout Japan and the world. It's one of the few Japanese craft beers that you will find in specialty liquor stores throughout the U.S. Okay, well, let's give this one a go. Again, it's Baird Nihon Koji Sour, batch number 4. Ooh, it's foaming up a little bit here. Yeah. Okay. Oops. Okay, so it's a kind of yellowish copper brown carbonation. It's pretty extensive throughout. You can see it there. Aroma. Whew. Okay, I do get a lot of citrus, some fruitiness, a kind of alcohol sense. It's not beer-like, but maybe more sake-like. The fruit is there, for sure. I get that citrus. It does taste kind of like mikan, and yeah, the fruitiness comes through even stronger, I think, through the Koji. It gives it a kind of almost fruit wine type of note to it. So kind of a blend. This is definitely what we call a hybrid beer with the use of the different type of fermenting agent. So the Koji does quite a different job, I think, than just regular beer yeast. Interesting, unusual. It might be a nice refreshing beer in late spring or summer. It has a little bit more depth than a typical light summer refresher, but it's tasty and crisp, certainly on the tongue. Once again, Baird Nihon Koji Sour, batch number 4 from Baird Beer, 6%, 25 IBU. Give it a try. Okay, and now moving along. Michael Lewis is one of the most famous journalists and writers of popular nonfiction in the United States. You know him from books like The Big Short, perhaps Moneyball, both of which were made into movies. He's a wonderful writer. He has a style that is once accessible and also a little bit sophisticated. He does a lot of research and spends his time and gets the information and then sets it out very nicely in the book. So this book came out in 2018, I think. 2018, yeah. And he's basically looking at things that are happening in the current political administration with the current president in the United States and worrying about them. The prologue is called Lost in Transition, and in that prologue he briefly outlines how unprepared the Trump administration was for taking power. In fact, they didn't really think they would win. He didn't have an acceptance speech prepared the night that he won the election, and so he really didn't seem to know what was required of him to take over the government. The Obama administration apparently spent a year with around 1,000 people across all parts of the government preparing to brief Trump administration officials on how their departments run. So, for example, people in the Department of Energy or Agriculture were assigned to set up a transition team to help the incoming government learn about government. And apparently this is pretty standard procedure. Bush did it for Obama. And so, people who haven't got a lot of experience in government learn how the government runs. But they did all of this for months, setting up things, and then after the day after the election, they were expecting people to come in. They had computers set up for them and offices set up for them. Nobody came. Nobody showed up for days, for weeks. Nobody came at all. And eventually people started filtering in and were very dismissive of the transition officials and didn't seem really interested in learning much about what was going on. And so there are 3 main sections. One deals with the Department of Energy, one with the Department of Agriculture, and one with the Department of Commerce. And Lewis decided he had to choose, among the different departments of government, and he chose these ones. And part of it was because most people don't know what these departments do, actually. So if you say State Department, many people understand kind of what their function is. But energy, even a presidential candidate named Rick Perry, he said that was one way he was going to save money, by doing away with unneeded departments of the government, including the Department of, he couldn't quite remember which department it was. There were three he was going to get rid of. And it turns out the one that he could not remember was the Department of Energy. And that's the one that he was appointed to lead. Michael Lewis said during his research he learned more probably about the Department of Energy than Rick Perry even knows now. And one reason why Rick Perry changed his mind about getting rid of it, of course, was the Department of Energy is controlling nuclear weapons, the storage and development of nuclear weapons, and also the cleanup efforts. For example, in Hanford, Washington, they spend about $3 billion a year in this tiny rural town to clean up the remnants of what was used to develop atomic weapons during World War II. The Department of Agriculture, Sonny Perdue is the head of that department, and he was a Georgia politician without much experience in agriculture. And Lewis says that this should really be called the Department of Rural, because that's what they do, is rural development. And this department really needs a scientist to run it. And the department is involved in so many experiments to try to determine what will happen due to climate change, how the food supply will change, how animal production will change. So, you know, a lot of things that really require a scientist, but it doesn't have one. The final one is the Department of Commerce, and this one he focuses on a couple of things. One is the census. Of course, they conduct the census and how it's being mismanaged now, and how they're probably not even ready to conduct the census. And also he focuses especially on the National Weather Service, which is a major part of the Department of Commerce, and how the head of AccuWeather is kind of fighting to prevent them from doing their job, because he thinks they're competing with his business, but he actually gets his information from them and doesn't have to pay for it. In any case, he discusses how the current president is probably the most neglectful of government, and that perhaps one good thing that may come out of this is people will come to recognize that the government is and can be a force for good, and not the contemporary libertarian idea that the government is just a bunch of overpaid bureaucrats who are, you know, sitting around doing nothing or getting in the way of businessmen. The government is really, as he claims, is a kind of experiment, a series of, you know, hundreds and hundreds of scientific experiments designed to produce something new, to protect people, to develop new technology through loans. So, for example, the iPhone, he said, wouldn't have existed without the government support it got, you know, with loans. Tesla is another example. And eventually the point is that, as this blurb says at the bottom, is that the deep state, which a lot of people seem to be worrying about, is really mostly people who know what they're doing, know what they're talking about, and people who care deeply about the jobs they're doing, and rather than making a lot of money in the private sector, but serving the country. So an excellent read, a short read, a cautionary read for our times. Again, Michael Lewis, The Fifth Risk. Well, that's it for today. Thank you very much for watching. We'll be continuing in the next video with another Baird Beer, and I hope you'll tune in for that. Please subscribe to the channel and leave me a comment, okay, about either the Baird Beer or about the books that I'm discussing. Take care. Bye-bye.